Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, there's a lot of things I like about role-playing games, and one of them is the idea that you can become very creative, that you can discover or shape, depending upon your bent, the ongoing narrative, the unfolding narrative, based upon the decisions you make, based upon what you think would be the most appropriate thing to happen, what would actually make sense, all that sort of stuff, both as a player and as a game master. However, I really enjoy, and one of my favorite parts about role-playing games is when these guys get involved, when the dice get involved. And it's not just you making the decisions. You step back and allow something else to prompt your creativity to introduce a bit of the unexpected. As you're playing to find out what happens, a lot of times these guys will tell you what happens, or at least give you hints about what happens, and then you can become creative in that manner. Anthony actually shared a blog with me and a couple different groups. I saw it. And the blog, I think it's called the Last Redoubt. The guy was talking about, I believe it was a guy, was talking about using the reaction roll. And it was, I think it was in basic D&D is what he talked about. It doesn't really matter what game it was. But, I smiled in recognition because, when I read my first role-playing game ever, which happened to be 1981 BX, there was a rule right in there that, when you meet monsters or non-player characters, sometimes you'll know how they'll react because you've kind of decided offhand. But other times you don't know, so you roll a couple dice and you consult this chart and you find out, are they friendly, are they neutral, are they kind of leaning one way or the other, or are they very unfriendly? And likewise, there was another reaction table in there. It's called the morale check, and you found out whether at some point during a combat or an encounter the foes kept on pressing the attacker, whether their morale failed and they tried to get away, all that sort of stuff. So the decision-making process wasn't just yours as a game master. These dice would actually inform you kind of what happened, and then you'd have to make stuff up. And the blog actually goes on to talk about some times where it was kind of counterintuitive. He rolled something and he was forced to make stuff up on the fly to explain why this roll went the way it did, why these people were more or less inclined to like the player characters. And that can be a great prompt for creativity, especially in those situations it's kind of seen counterintuitive. The dice are also great for taking the onus of responsibility off of the game master, where, okay, well, I didn't decide what happened here, the dice decided. Dice fiat is a lot easier to swallow than GM fiat, if you know what I mean. And the other thing that made me think of, though, as I read this and I thought about it, is it's very easy for us, as game masters, to get stuck in really concrete ideas of what certain situations are going to be like, how certain people would behave, etc. Now, there's more recent mechanics besides the old school reaction roll, like the weak hit in Powered by the Apocalypse games, or the Fantasy Flight games, Star Wars or Genesis mechanic of the idea that there's advantages and threats and triumphs and despairs. So these show up in the rolls, and you're prompted to narrate that sort of stuff as game masters and players in that particular case. And there's a lot of other mechanics out there that kind of do the same thing, or at least take decision making out of your hands and force creativity and thinking out of the box, because the dice all of a sudden tell you, well, there's this kind of result. Now you narrate exactly what that means. I like it when the dice are an active player. Sometimes you can decide that the stairs collapse during the bar fight, but there's something magical about those times when the dice inform you that that's what happens. And that's one of the things that keeps me coming back to gaming, is those moments where you roll the dice and you're like, I can't believe it. Well, this is going to be interesting. And you kind of figure out, how to narrate that, or what happens now? How do we get out of this one? Or as a game master, man, that's going to be interesting. In the absence of actual rules, because those are I gave you examples of actual rules in real games. Part of my invisible rule books, that I just talked about a couple videos ago, and these invisible rule books are probably, or at least this part of them is probably written due to my immediate exposure to things like reaction rolls. Part of my invisible rule books, or my algorithm, is to pull out the dice and let them decide. If there's a time when all of a sudden, we're not sure what happens here, do I just go ahead and make it up? It's very easy to get in that mindset, in that groove as a game master. But sometimes I let the dice decide. Well, is that door locked? He just asked me, who does the Octafint attack? Is that member of the militia? Is that one that you used to serve with? Do you know that guy? What faction is the caravan in the distance aligned with? The game is full of questions, no matter what game you're playing. Often the players will ask the unexpected. They ask you a bunch of questions, and it's very easy to get into a routine of simply making the stuff up on the fly, answering those questions. If we listen, the emerging fiction also asks a lot of questions. And we get used to making up a lot on the spot. And sometimes we don't realize like how many golden opportunities we're missing and how much we as game masters start to hog the narrative. And so sometimes it pays to let the dice get involved. And this creates instant drama, instant tension, and it provides prompts to stretch creativity when the plastic gods have spoken. And so sometimes, at least for me, in the absence of an actual rule, somebody will ask me something, or we'll get this moment where like, gee, I'm not really sure what would happen here. I have an idea, but you know what? This is worth it. All right, odds evens. Let's see what happens. So that's my thought for the day. Once again, the plastic gods speak, and sometimes dice fiat is the best fiat there is. What do you think about that?